Hey, I'm Max. Today I'm speaking with Steve. He's Australian and he started this company in Melbourne 14 years ago.
I run a creative agency.
But during COVID, Steve decided to move his business and himself to Singapore.
Tax is great here.
I took him for a walk to find out what's the better place to live and do business, Australia or Singapore. Enjoy.
What's the three things you're still not used to in Singapore?
One thing I'm still not used to is not having a car. I think that the feeling of freedom you get from being able to just hop in, go somewhere, you've got to plan a little bit more ahead when you have to book a Grab or take a train or something like that. But it's not that hard, it's just something to get used to. Another thing I always find weird is how easy it is to get things delivered. I'm the kind of person that grew up, when you wanted something, you would drive out to the shop and you get it. Maybe it's furniture, you take it home, you build it yourself, or maybe it's food and you go out, buy ingredients, come home and cook. No one really does that here. Everyone just orders what they want and it gets delivered, and it's quick and it's cheap.
What are the non-obvious things that Australian or maybe, let's say, Westerner should know before moving to Singapore?
Firstly, I would say don't worry too much. I would say that.
That's Aussie's approach.
I mean, everything that you want from anywhere in the world is here in Singapore, and I mean down to the groceries you can buy in the store. I mean down to the type of education you can have, meeting people that speak your own language, no matter where in the world you're from. Having access to like a great social network, you'll build that instantly because so many people come in and out of Singapore all the time. There's always this appetite to meet new people. I think because Singapore is such a safe kind of environment, and the people that come here have kind of, I guess they've all come with the same kind of attitude, right? They've all got some reason to be here, some reason to contribute to Singapore, and so we've all got kind of a common interest and something to talk about. And I've just found it so easy here to pick up a conversation with someone casually in a coffee shop or a bar, and just become friends with them, which is something I would just never do in Australia. My favorite story is I just out of lockdown, because I moved here during COVID, I walked across the road from where I was staying to a bar in a hotel and sat down and chatted to the guy behind the bar for a couple of minutes, and then before long someone else walked in and started chatting to the bartender as well, and eventually we both got chatting, and due to the COVID restrictions we couldn't sit together. So he just said to me, do you want to just come back to my place? We'll open a bottle of whiskey. And I think from that point on we just became friends. And at first I was really nervous about that. The idea of just like meeting a stranger in a bar and having a chat and then becoming friends would just be, alarm bells in any other country. But here in Singapore, I think it feels really safe and comfortable to do something like that.
Are there any maniacs in Singapore?
Let's hope not. No, I think we feel very well looked after here, and so comfortable and safe that I don't think people are too worried about sort of just meeting a stranger and welcoming them. Whether it's, inviting people to a barbecue or something like that. I think, the number of times that I've met people and then, a couple of days later ended up, on a boat with them or, at a barbecue or something like that. It seems to just happen all the time.
Basically, you need to be an extrovert, to make friends.
No, I mean, I'm actually an introvert. I just think it comes out of necessity. You move here without kind of that network of friends and family, and you have to meet people.
What's the no questions in Singapore?
I actually think Singapore's pretty free.
I know one.
What do you reckon?
You ask someone, where are you from? Where are you originally from? There are different types of Singaporeans, different origin, different roots.
Yep.
And sometimes you assume based on something, like I don't do it anymore, but you can assume based on an accent or something, oh, when you come to Singapore.
Right.
Oh man, like my grandparents came to Singapore a long time ago. You know what I mean?
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Hey guys, if you want more stories like this one, please subscribe to this channel, like this video, it will help me a lot.
How much money you need if you come to Singapore, let's say from Sydney?
Typical day or month would be maybe 4 to 5K on rent if you're living in a condo. But you definitely could live more cheaply than that if you wanted to. Renting an HDB, you wouldn't buy a car, so you'd be on MRT or Grabs when you need to, and you could easily spend anywhere between maybe $5 up to $30, $40 a day on transport. Food, I think, can be really cheap or it can be really expensive or anything in between. So it can totally match your budget. I'll often buy a $3 lunch at a coffee shop.
Same.
Or, you know, I can splurge on a night out and spend a few $100 quite easily.
How's your typical day off looks like in Singapore?
Food and wine. No, I won't say wine actually. Wine's pretty expensive here. Food and drinks. So I love hanging around those kind of al fresco places, and I know that's maybe not so popular with everyone here who's been here a bit longer than I have, but sitting outside on a warm day with a cold beer is pretty special for me still.
Is there Aussie community is actually big here in Singapore?
Yeah, it is. And I guess it's a mix because Australia is so close to Singapore.
Yeah.
There's a mix in the community here of kind of longer term expats and then shorter term expats and just visitors, frequent, you know, business or social visitors to Singapore.
Yeah.
So you definitely feel connected to Australia. The coffee culture has come across here from Australia. So there's a lot of Australian coffee in Singapore, a lot of Australian kind of led cafes, grocery stores, things like that. So you definitely feel at home when you're walking through the shops and you see all the familiar products and things like that. It's kind of funny when my colleagues bring over, you know, a box of Tim Tams or a jar of Vegemite, and of course you can get them on the shelves here in the supermarkets already anyway.
What I feel interesting, like, you know, some people in Singapore, like Singaporeans even, they kind of, oh, Singapore too small, I want to like retire in Australia and like feel this freedom and stuff.
I could definitely see the appeal of people who have spent a lot of time in Singapore or another big city thinking that it's better to move to a country where there's a lot more space. I think Australia definitely has that sort of going for it, in that you can probably get a lot more space for your money.
Yeah.
That said, I mean, Singapore is such a clean kind of environment. It's not like some other big cities where you're trading off maybe a polluted, noisy environment.
Speaking about noisy environment, there are a lot of like supercars, expensive noisy cars in Singapore.
Maybe you don't want to retire on Orchard Road. I think the idea of, you know, sitting back with a big backyard and a swimming pool or something, that's pretty achievable in Australia compared to what you would get in Singapore. So I could definitely see why people would see that appealing.
Yeah.
Food as well. The produce in Australia is fresh and it's close and it's cheaper. So I think there's a big appeal for a lot of people in terms of having access to that kind of stuff. But I don't know, I'd be interested to meet some people who have tried that exercise and see what they think.
Yeah.
Because I've got aging parents in Australia, and I think, you know, one thing to consider there has been the transport, the access to amenities, the way you've generally got to drive everywhere. It's hard to get around, it's long distances and things like that. So as you start to age, actually being in an amenable city like Singapore kind of does make a lot of sense to me as well.
What's the three biggest differences between Sydney and Singapore?
The first big difference, I think, between Sydney and Singapore is space. I think you would expect to have a lot more space, even if you live in an apartment in Sydney, you'd expect to have a bigger balcony, you'd expect to have closer, bigger amenities nearby. The other one is I think culturally, there's a sense in Singapore that in order to sort of live harmoniously in the middle of Asia with so many different cultures and communities in the city and around the city, I think the government really sort of does a great job of communicating to people that it's necessary to kind of make some compromise, for everyone to kind of compromise so that everyone gets along and feels safe here. Whereas I think in Australia, there's not that same sense. There's more of a freedom in terms of how you express yourself and how you act and behave. And I think that gives Australia its kind of characteristically rough edges in terms of like attitudes and culture and things like that. People feel pretty free in Australia to express themselves.
Can you give an example?
Taking it maybe to the work side, people in Australia tend to be quicker to be outspoken, quicker to have an opinion about things.
Yeah.
That probably flows between work and personal life, but I really notice it in the workplace. I really notice that in Australia, you're more likely to have a team that'll all speak up, that'll all sort of give their opinion. It doesn't really matter who they're speaking to, kind of break down that sense of rank and just sort of say what you think.
Yeah.
In Singapore, there's more of a sense of maybe waiting to be invited to speak, maybe holding back what you say depending on who you're talking to. And I think it probably comes from the necessity to try and create harmony, yeah.
Which you prefer personally? What approach?
Oh gosh, I'd love to think that there's a balance between the two. I know that's a pretty cliched thing to say, but we have a lot of success in business because we're known as kind of being a bit more outspoken about having opinions and about communicating freely and openly with our clients. We've got a lot of great talent here, and I'm kind of focused at the moment on how to tap into that talent. Not trying to change people, but trying to make sure that everyone feels that they've got a voice, even if they've come from a background where maybe traditionally they're not encouraged to have one. I'm really focused at work of not trying to change people here in Singapore, but just trying to create an environment where they feel comfortable. And I think that's the basis for us of great creativity, great collaboration is communication. That can be something that's quite hard to achieve in a city and an environment where people have grown up maybe not feeling so comfortable speaking out.
You did projects in so many different locations, in Australia, in Singapore, in Japan, in India, Indonesia. What's the easiest place to do business in?
Apart from Singapore?
Apart of Singapore. And what's the most difficult one?
One of the hardest countries to work in is probably somewhere like Japan, where you've got a language barrier, you've got really significant cultural barriers. And I think there's an expectation that unless you really understand the local culture and speak the local language, then you're probably not going to be seen as able to contribute as much. And I think, maybe that's quite fair, but it does make it hard for us to do business in those kind of places. We definitely have to work harder at understanding the culture and the language before we can kind of feel accepted there.
I know that in Japan you need to know how the decision-making process works. It's not like in Australia, I guess, or in America. So you can kind of, through someone in the low level, you can get to someone in the high level. There you need to know how to get to the high level and how to approach this person.
Exactly. The most interesting one for me is how people sit in a boardroom. And we all tend to kind of just walk into a boardroom and take a seat wherever there's one available. And I've definitely been in meetings in Japan where we've spent maybe the first 20 minutes of the meeting shuffling seats so that everyone's sitting in the right order based on how they're participating in the meeting. The more senior person, or maybe the person that's needed to speak the most, will sit at the front. And I tend to find that still in meetings in Japan, you get a lot of people in there, whether they're there to participate or not. Whereas I see the trend in the US and kind of the Western world being, if you're not there to actively participate in a meeting, then you're kind of wasting your time to be there. So it's a pretty different environment to do business, I think.
3 things that you kind of adopted after living in Singapore for 2 years.
I swim a lot more here. The year-round hot weather has made me really adapt to getting used to sweating everywhere I go and then really enjoying jumping in a pool afterwards. I think differently to a lot of Singaporeans, I really love eating outside and being outside. So where I meet a lot of friends who live here or have lived here for a long time, and they always sort of gravitate towards shopping malls and things like that. I love being outside. It can be a little challenging to find those places, but they definitely exist. I'm not going to say Singlish because I think I think it comes off super weird to hear some Aussie trying to speak Singlish, but I picked up some of the words. I think in a text message I can get away with it.
You can use can for everything. Yes, I will go there with you. Just instead of that, yeah, can. Oh, yes, it's can. Oh, is it possible? Also can. So what's your personal attitude about Singlish?
Sometimes Singlish makes sense to me. I think there's some shorter ways to say things that are great. And I think also I've learned a lot of this Singlish is borrowed from the different languages that kind of make up the community here. So it's probably good that there's a bit of a representation of people speaking a bit of Chinese and a bit of Malay and things like that. But sometimes people will say things and it'll take way longer or be way more confusing. People here can speak English really well as well, so it's not like they wouldn't be able to to just speak.
Did you pick up any Singlish words or sentences or not?
I definitely started saying can a lot. I think it sounds so cringeworthy when I try and put la on the end of a sentence, so I avoid that at all costs.
I tried it. I tried to put la, but it's still unnatural for me. But sometimes if you do like some expression, you add up expression. It's like you just put la at the end.
Yeah, I guess so. I find myself saying choke a bit.
Choke. Yeah. What do you miss from Australia?
What do I miss? No, everything's good here. I know what's that?
I agree.
What do you miss?
Me, sometimes winter, but just for a week per year.
Right. Yeah. No, I've never really missed the cold, actually.